The voting has ended here in New Hampshire, and results in the first primaries of this presidential election are coming in. Among Democrats, with almost a quarter of the precincts now reporting, Bernie Sanders is in the lead, followed by Pete Buttigieg by a few points and Amy Klobuchar in third place. Elizabeth Warren and Joe Biden are well back. Meantime, in the Republican primary, no surprise, President Donald Trump has already been declared the winner. But there is already a reshaping of the Democratic race. Two of the Democratic candidates have already announced tonight within the hour they are dropping out. They are Colorado Senator Michael Bennet and entrepreneur Andrew Yang. Let's hear what both of them had to say, beginning with Andrew Yang.
We highlighted the real problems in our communities as our economy is being transformed before our eyes by technology and automation. And Americans know now that when you go to a factory in Michigan, you do not find wall-to-wall immigrants doing work. You find wall-to-wall robot arms and machines doing the work that people used to do. I am not someone who wants to accept donations and support in a race that we will not win. And so tonight, I am announcing I am suspending my campaign for president.
We love you, Andrew!
Thank you, I love you too. Thank you, Andrew.
And the other dropout announcement we've already heard, again, within just the last few minutes, is Colorado Senator Michael Bennet.
I feel nothing but joy tonight as we conclude this particular campaign and this particular chapter. I am going to do absolutely everything I can do as one human being to make sure that Donald Trump is a one-term president.
So the race already changing rapidly as these results come in. And tonight I'm joined by Amna Nawaz in Washington, where our NewsHour colleagues are watching these results closely come in as well. Amna.
That's right, Judy. While most of the attention is on the Democratic race, unsurprisingly, we can now declare President Donald Trump the winner in the Republican primary, with looks like just over a quarter of the votes now reporting in there. You see 85% of those votes going to President Trump. Judy, back to you.
Thank you, Amna. And I am here now in Manchester with Lucas Meyer. He is a strategist for a number of Democratic campaigns here in New Hampshire. He's also president of the state's Young Democrats. Lucas Meyer, welcome to the NewsHour and our special coverage. Surprises tonight. Yes, Bernie Sanders is in the lead, but followed closely by Pete Buttigieg. What do you make of that?
Yeah, certainly a really exciting night here in New Hampshire. You know, Pete Buttigieg came into this campaign a relative unknown, unless you're a deep party insider like me who was following the DNC chairman race a couple years ago. You had no idea who the mayor of South Bend, Indiana was. So to see him make these gains and then see Senator Klobuchar make a really late push and really, you know, a lot of the operatives in the state sort of maybe thought it was a little phony. We weren't sure if the surge was real, but it is certainly real. And we'll see if she can carry it out of New Hampshire across the rest of the country.
And see what she does with it. So at this point, and again, only a quarter of the results in, but that's what we see. But the other dramatic story tonight is Joe Biden. At this point, he's coming in fifth behind Elizabeth Warren, both of them well back from the top three. Joe Biden left the state.
Yeah, no, it was definitely unexpected. Vice President Biden was leading in the polls up until just a couple weeks ago, had a robust campaign in the state, was in the state early. So to see him leave before even the results had come in was certainly surprising. And to see him lead off the debate on Friday night was certainly surprising, hearing him say that he had sort of conceded the state to a degree.
There's been a lot of discussion, Lucas Meyer, about the struggles that New Hampshire voters have had making up their minds. And part of that is because there's so many candidates, so many more than we've seen in the past. But why is that? How are we seeing that?
Yeah, I think this is emblematic of the primary here in New Hampshire and the voters of New Hampshire really taking their role as the first in the nation state really seriously and really not wanting to rush that decision. I mean, even this morning around town, you talk to folks and they still hadn't made up their mind yet. And I don't think a lot of people really believed that folks were going to take that long to make up their mind with all these campaigns and all this information and all these events, all this access. But it really played out. And I think certainly Senator Klobuchar's result really is emblematic of that, where the debate performance coming out of Iowa, right. I think you probably saw a lot of support for Senator Warren cut to Senator Klobuchar. So definitely not a boring night here.
In Iowa, it was said right after the Iowa results, which of course were mishandled, or at least the count didn't come in as it should have on time. It took days before we really knew what had happened. But there does seem to be a reaction to Iowa in that, again, Biden did not do as well as expected there. Klobuchar did better than expected.
Yeah, coming out of Iowa, I think, I feel as an operative, I feel for those campaign staffers in Iowa, having spent a year working on the ground and then to sort of not have that finality come in the caucuses last week. But I do think some of that uncertainty coming out of Iowa really forced New Hampshire voters to take a step back and really, I think, reanalyze their support for some candidates, which is maybe why we're seeing some of the volatility, seeing Mayor Buttigieg really uptight with Senator Sanders, who,
yes,
I mean, he had a really tough standard to uphold from 2016 to this year, so I think it was fascinating.
Bernie Sanders won New Hampshire 4 years ago by 22 points. Now, granted, his main opponent was Hillary Clinton. It was mainly the two of them. And this time he will argue, he's been arguing, I talked to him this morning, a lot more candidates in the race. But this appears to be, at this point, a tighter margin. I also quickly want to ask you about the Republicans in the state. No surprise, President Trump, the winner of that primary. Republicans do seem united behind the president.
They certainly do, even regardless of Governor Wells' efforts in the state, which I was kind of surprised he got as many percentage points as he did, honorable effort. There certainly are a lot of, I would say, moderate Republicans in the state looking for an alternative. And I think that dynamic as we head into the general election, as a Democratic Party coalesces around our nominee, I think some of those decisions by those moderate voters is going to play a really big role in November.
Really in it. Again, Bill Weld was the president's only opponent, governor of your neighboring state, Massachusetts. Luke Smyer, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
We appreciate it. And Amna, back to you.
Thanks, Judy. Let's take a closer look now at the state of the race in New Hampshire right now. This is so far with just over 31% of those votes in right now. It's still very early, but as we mentioned before, Senator Sanders has that early lead with over 27% of the vote so far. Pete Buttigieg coming in second with just over 23%, and Senator Amy Klobuchar there in third place with over 19% of those early votes. Again, just over 31% of votes in so far. We're going to keep up with those results as they come in, of course, but for now we want to go live to Lisa Desjardins. She has been on the ground in Manchester following these results as they come in at a Bernie Sanders campaign event there. Lisa, no surprise so far in some regards, right? This is Senator Sanders' backyard. What's the feeling right there as these early results are coming in and showing him with a bit of a lead?
I think you can hear what the sentiment is here. We have a lot of chants from Bernie Sanders supporters basically saying that they believe anything is possible for this campaign. Changing the world is possible is part of their chant. For Bernie Sanders, he had a massive get out the vote campaign. Just on Saturday alone of this week, his campaign says they knocked on 20% of the doors in this state. They're reaping the benefits from that, it looks like, in these early results here in New Hampshire.
Lisa, I want to walk you through a little bit more of what we know from some of the votes that have been coming in New Hampshire. As a result of some voter surveys, we can kind of break it down by age to see how people are breaking for which candidates. When you look at those younger demographics, these are voters age 18 to 29, Senator Sanders there with a clear lead, 49% of those younger votes. As we make our way up through the age brackets, you see among voters 30 to 44. Again, Senator Sanders has a lead there, 43%. The next closest candidate, Mayor Pete Buttigieg, with 19%. Older voters still there. You start to see them break for Mayor Pete Buttigieg. 26% of those voters aged 45 to 64. And then when you go up to the next age bracket, that is voters over the age of 65, Senator Amy Klobuchar seems to be in the lead there with 23% of those votes. Lisa, based on what you're hearing on the ground, the voters you've been talking to there in New Hampshire, does that track that age breakdown with the candidates?
Oh, 100%. I kept a track of all these undecided voters in the state. I finally got responses from all of them, Amna. And to me, it does seem that it is the younger undecided voters that were going for Bernie Sanders. Those who are parents, those who are grandparents, they were split between Elizabeth Warren, Amy Klobuchar, and Pete Buttigieg, those that I spoke to. But this is a challenge for Bernie Sanders as he goes forward. His coalition is young. In these states, he's also won with communities of color. But the young do not always turn out in November. It's something his campaign will think about. Also, Amna, some news from the Amy Klobuchar campaign to me. They tell me that they are now ramping up their staff in Nevada. They plan to have 50 staff members there in the next few days. And listen to this, Amna, they are spending a 7-figure amount. They didn't give me the exact amount. 7 figures on a TV ad buy for Amy Klobuchar in Nevada. That is a massive amount for her campaign, which has run on a very limited amount of money. One sign that competitors are nervous about Amy Klobuchar, Amna, a rival campaign, and I agreed to call them only that, a rival campaign texted me and said, Amy Klobuchar doesn't have the infrastructure. Amy Klobuchar hasn't been put under the microscope. You know, they want us to ask questions about Amy Klobuchar. Clearly, they're concerned. The Klobuchar campaign answers by saying, hey, we've gotten this far on limited resources. We plan to go farther.
Amy Klobuchar clearly seizing the moment there and probably going to face some of the fire some of the others have as they have seen surges. Lisa, before I let you go, is there any indication now that we have the news 2 more candidates are suspending their campaigns, Andrew Yang and Michael Bennet, is there any indication of where their voters might go?
I don't think so. You know, we have seen from a recent poll that Andrew Yang voters seem to be most loyal to him. And some 42% of them in a recent poll said they would not support any other Democratic nominee. That is much higher than any other candidate. So for Democrats, those are voters that they have to win back that are going to be harder for them to get than other candidates dropping out. One other note, Amna, Tom Steyer has announced he is not dropping out of this race. Of course, he has been running a very strong campaign in South Carolina. He wants to get there and be on the ballot there. So he's staying in the race. We know he's not dropping out at this point.
Lisa Desjardins reporting for us from a Bernie Sanders campaign event in Manchester, New Hampshire. Thanks, Lisa. Good to talk to you. We'll go back now to Judy Woodruff in New Hampshire.
Thank you, Amna. And for more analysis of the race here in New Hampshire, I am with our senior politics reporter, Dan Bush. Dan, we're listening to Lisa. We're hearing what the different campaigns are saying. You've also been looking at these interviews with voters, a so-called voter survey done by the Associated Press. We're all trying to figure out why voters have done what they've done and what might happen in the future. What are you seeing? I mean, in particular, everybody's been talking about the split between moderates, more moderate and more liberal voters among the Democrats.
That's the big story here, Judy. We're seeing that divide play out. And one thing that really jumps out when you look at these survey results among voters overall here in New Hampshire, just 43% said they'd be very satisfied if Bernie Sanders won the nomination. Just 39% said they'd be very satisfied if Pete Buttigieg won, who now, if the results hold, will come in second place. That very is critical, I think, because it speaks to energy and turnout in a general election. So we're seeing in these numbers, Democrats are still pretty hesitant about now in Iowa and New Hampshire who is finishing first and second so far.
So interesting, because we know when I was looking at the same voter survey you were, and when Democrats were asked what is your overriding quality you want in a candidate, in a nominee, it's 92% said someone who can beat Donald Trump. That overrode policy differences, policy issues, and so forth. I'm curious about age and whether, there was a lot of conversation about Bernie Sanders appealing to the young and the other candidates having a hard time with the young, and yet the older voters are the ones who turn out reliably in elections.
They do, and when you look at these numbers, another interesting thing when we look at Buttigieg, who would be the youngest president ever if elected, it's no surprise that there are some young people who do support him, who do relate to him because of his age. But when you look at those older age brackets, there are a lot of older voters as well who don't see his, relative inexperience on the national level compared to his rivals as an impediment. Yesterday, I spoke with voters at a Buttigieg rally, voters in their 60s, 70s, one gentleman in his 80s who said that he sees in Buttigieg his children. He wants the next generation to get a shot. So Buttigieg is right now getting support across the board, even though Sanders is still dominating with those younger voters.
And the last thing, and I think this is something that Lucas Meyer, the Democratic strategist, and I were speaking about, was late deciders. People have had a very hard time here in New Hampshire, a lot of them making up their minds. What is it, 35% made up their mind just in the last few days. They broke heavily for Buttigieg and Klobuchar.
They did, and I was hearing that from voters again and again in recent days here in New Hampshire. I spoke with one person just yesterday who said they're going to figure it out when they walk into the ballot box. You were hearing that a lot of indecision still. And if you look at the two sort of sides of the party, a lot of Warren and Sanders supporters who are undecided but only focus on them, a lot of Buttigieg, Biden, Klobuchar leaning voters who are only focused on that side. So there's not a lot of overlap.
Not a lot of overlap at all. Well, we're going to continue to go through these numbers. We do have a PBS special coming up in a few hours, but this is something that there are so many numbers to follow and so many candidates to follow at this hour. So we hope you'll follow the election results. We're going to be updating this program later if we have news. You can catch up on all the day's news later tonight on this PBS station with that special news hour following the New Hampshire primary results.